gonna ask Bruce to share with you potentially a Jesus encounter that has every opportunity to go to the right, and maybe it just completely falls apart. And then I'm going to stand a little bit on a soapbox before I jump us in with climate change and child indoctrination. So, Bruce, would you please?
I'm assuming you're talking about what happened to me yesterday?
I am.
Okay. All right. I'll keep it really simple. I believe in my heart of hearts that those in leadership in the local body of believers should support the ministries that are part of that church. Pretty basic. And so I met with some leaders yesterday from my group. And I had one in particular who has chosen not to not be involved in our weekly Bible study. And so I kind of approached it from the perspective of what can we do to maybe make that better? And, talked about changing days and talking about the format and different things like that. And was not getting a lot of progress in that. So I finally said, well, look, I think that because we only have 2 basic services a week, our Wednesday night Bible study and our Sunday church service, which is just that. It's not Sunday school. It's just a worship service. I said, I think that the leaders in our fellowship should have to be at both of those. And the firestorm began at that point. And essentially I was told that wasn't the case, and that I didn't have the authority to say that because I was one of plurality of leaders, and which really kind of set me back a little bit. I was like, really? I would think you don't want to do that. I would think that the leaders would want to be involved in the 2 services a week. And so, yeah, that didn't end well. And there's a lot more behind that, but the bottom line is that I was pretty flummoxed to believe that those who had accepted leadership in a local body of believers would not want to support the public ministry events that the church put on. And more to be discussed about that, but I was told that I was being prideful, and that it was referred to, and this is the part that kind of floored me a little bit. It was referred to as as in they were speaking to me, your Bible study. I was like, oh, no. It's the church's Bible study. I happen to be the guy leading it at this time. And so it's really interesting how that transpired. And I had a lot of other things I was going to talk about in the meeting, but it stopped after that. And I'm just as glad, because I was so confused that I would have to debate with people in leadership positions about their physical involvement in the primary services that the church had. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I remember years ago, I was involved in many things in the church, and the pastor came up to me and asked me about this it was a fairly new thing, but another service that the church had going on, and you need to be there. And I looked him in the face and I said, I'm already doing enough. And he accepted that. But I mean, I was at church 4 or 5 nights a week doing things. And so I'm not one that believes in turning husbands or wives in the church widows, or husbands in the church widowers. I'm not into that. But when it's a fairly small number of commitments, and the total time commitment is fairly small, then I think I'm within my right to ask for that. So apparently there's disagreement about that. So you can pray for me, because I'm totally fine with that.
Hey, folks, I asked Bruce to share that because if that was a difficult encounter with people who love and accept Jesus as their Messiah, then it can be even more confusing, unsettling, and embarrassing to have these Jesus encounters with people you don't know. And sometimes that feeling in the pit of your belly that you walk away from, that you walk away with after one of these kinds of Jesus encounters, doesn't rev up your engines to make you want to do it again or anymore. It's almost like that really bad meal that you eat that just stays in the pit of your stomach and you can't get rid of it. And so, folks, that's why we have these discussions about your Jesus encounters, because what Bruce just described happens among believership. This is going back to Will's point about church running like a business. This happens in places where folks gather under the big building. It's difficult to approach folks without fear of being rejected or without fear of people pointing a finger saying, "Who are you to say to me?" And that's why we're trying to help us all build up the muscle right now, folks, because that rebuking and that's why it's okay when Sarah talks about, I planned to, but I didn't, because we need to discuss sometimes our failures to launch, because our failures to launch sometimes are in the back of my mind when I make an approach that feels uncomfortable during the course of the week, because I go, you know what, Sarah tried it, and it didn't work. Doesn't mean I'm going to be successful, but I'm going to try it too. Diane met with this small group of people, and they weren't as embracing of that particular philosophy, but you know what? Diane put herself out there, so I think I can try to do that too. So let me pause there and give you a little bit of chance to feedback, and I'll step briefly on my soapbox and then ask us about climate change and child indoctrination.
I have a suggestion for Pastor Bruce. I'd like to suggest that from now on, he carries around a piece of paper in his pocket that has 3 words on it and maybe a punctuation, depending on how you want to do this. The words are, I know, but. Because this is the script that you're going to be hearing from this individual in the near future, I'm thinking. And then you can pull that out when they begin to use that script and say, here, I wrote that down for you. Because that sounds like that you're going to be hearing that very, very shortly. And that's just me saying it. You know, you can do whatever you like, but I have a sneaking suspicion that when you have expectations from your leadership, you can hear, I know, but, and they'll be on their way out the door. And that's just me. It's just what I thought of when you said that, because it's like, really? 2 services, and he's not going to be able to be a leader by example. I don't know about that.
Well, I understand that somewhat, because we talked about this in the Bible study as well. You know, churches are always looking for people to fill positions, correct? Mm-hmm. Motivations aren't always God-driven as much as they can't say no. They feel like it may be a way to connect with others. I mean, I'm just being honest here. But they might feel like they are led, but they have very limited time, or you don't know, like I have spouse issues, you know, I have to check with Jim, and it's a balancing act. You know, if they have children, there's another balancing act. So we talked about how busy this world is, how we've got caught up in all this busy stuff, and we're getting selfish with our time. That's why churches can't fill positions as easily as they used to. Used to be we kind of revolved around our church week. You know, that was our entertainment, our socialization, not only just to learn about Jesus and God. It was like, it's not that anymore. It's not the community center, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'm not surprised, you know, and I told people, I said, you know, the better answer is I need to pray about that, you know, before you commit to something, because it may not be in your giftedness. It may not be where you feel God is going to lead you. He might be involved in something else you have no idea about. Is he mentoring somebody? I mean, there's so many factors, but our first reaction is a knee-jerk reaction of, I'm hurt, or that doesn't seem right to me. And, that's why we have so many different churches, because people get hurt and they trouble up. It's never as easy as what's on the surface, is all I'm saying.
So, especially in the wake of Brother Gene's comments, and I'm usually not this guy, but I think that there's some value to this, especially having listened to Bruce and then having lived through this with Brother Steve, especially. I don't think it's a bad idea to have a T-shirt that's branded with whatever our logo is going to look like, and the theme of that T-shirt is "I know but," because that's a great discussion phrase for people that claim to be Jesus's people. I think it's an inviting phrase to have a discussion about, and to point out that it's our go-to rationale a whole lot when it comes to operating according to what pleases Jesus.
I'm not so sure that sort of phraseology is going to fly as the great white throne and the bema seat occur.
But if you can
So-
have that conversation now, it would make that a whole lot better.
Mhm.
A whole lot better. A whole lot. I'm sure that's proper English, but you know what I mean. Sometimes you wear a T-shirt and it's a great conversation starter.
Mhm.
I'm picturing this T-shirt in my head now, Preston.
Okay,
You know?
design has begun.
No, I'm picturing it's like the I know, and the ellipses, and on the back is like a but and like all caps. And just I'm thinking, what kind of conversation could that generate? Especially if you have a church logo on it, or even if you don't have a church logo on it. Sometimes somebody kind of say, "What do you know?" Or I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Sometimes those can be your, I wouldn't say easy conversation starter, but perhaps a conversation starter, which is sometimes just the hardest thing to do, because how
Correct.
do you, right? How can you come around and say, "Hey, can I tell you?" Or "Can I ask you?" Sometimes that's a little more scary, right? Than if you have
Right.
just this innocuous piece of fabric and you kind of have that as your conversation starter. I don't know.
Oh no, young lady, you're right on.
646. There you go.
I was in DC a couple days ago, and has this great T-shirt. And I didn't notice it because I guess I hadn't seen it before. And it has blazoned on the front of it, "Jesus is the reason for the season," and it's McHuge, so you can't look at her and not see it. And that kind of billboard practice is one that may help with the Jesus encounters, because somebody sees your shirt and wants to respond to the shirt as opposed to you.
It kind of gets back to when Steve saw the people in Walmart, I don't know, a couple months ago with the guy's T-shirt. He's kind of like, okay, that's on his T-shirt, but the young lady that he's with, which looks like maybe his daughter, has a very different T-shirt. It's kind of like, one of these things doesn't necessarily go together. It's almost like you wanted to go up there and say, excuse me, but but we didn't realize till the checkout line.
I love the idea of the T-shirt more than I can tell you. The only thing I would change is put it all on the front, because there's some weird stuff that goes on in my mind when the word on the back is only the word "but"
Oh,
and in the back. That's almost.
I know, but is unfortunately the mindset in some regard of the folks that Pastor Bruce encountered. Whatever their reason is, I don't know, but you can't tell me that. You can't demand. You can't expect that I'm going to. Or if that's the case, yeah, but. And folks aren't too concerned right now with the Bema seat or the Great White Throne Judgment. I don't know that is an active belief among our population in the way that Diane just described, that the church is not the center of our social or our family life anymore. It's just not. So people aren't afraid of hell the same way that they were when some of us were kids. People aren't afraid of an eternity away from their creator, because this world has made it so that virtual reality is where a lot of folks are anticipating spending a lot of time anyway. And they like sometimes the choice of virtual world than the regular world. So we're in a real screwy kind of world, folks. And any mechanism that we can use to be able to have an encounter that allows the Holy Spirit to be active is what we want. But please recognize that you're going to have failures to launch, like what you heard Sarah talking about. You're going to have some neat promotion opportunities like Diane with her young ladies. You're going to have crashes and burn with folks that you think should get it, like Pastor Bruce, and you're going to have occasional highs like I do meeting that youngster who's 17 years old. That's the entire gamut, folks, but we're called to be able to go out and find out if we need to impact those people's lives. So let me stand on my soapbox for a second, and then we'll see if there's any feedback or comment about that, and then we'll transition to climate change and good old child indoctrination. It's real easy for a guy like Gene. It's real easy for a guy called to not only the ministry but the pastorship, like Pastor Bruce, to generate a lot of information that's quality to present to believers. And surprisingly, maybe reflecting Will, people think that the bonus for that is that there's a paycheck, or that there's a stipend, or that there's some kind of remuneration. Folks, paraphrasing John, the disciple that Jesus loved. As I've gotten and get to be an old fuddy-duddy, I have no greater joy than when folks are impacted by the teaching and the training that we're doing, and their lives are changed and transformed. And folks walk in the way that's honoring and glorifying to the Lord. I have no greater joy when that happens. And I know it sounds so cornball, but I get it as I begin to get to be an older dude. And I say that because I had a very uplifting comment from Diane. And folks, I'm not fishing for these, but I am telling you that this really works for your leadership, and especially in the wake of Pastor Bruce's experience and what he experienced yesterday. Look, you all have been a part of church services where at the end, the pastor goes and stands at the back of the door and shakes everybody's hand, and people shake the guy's hand and say, "That was a good sermon. Good job. That was really, really neat. Man, you stepped on my toes for about 15 minutes there." Listen, that's not the point of what it is that perhaps the three of us and Steve are doing here. It's not to get an attaboy. And if it is an attaboy, I want to share with you something that Diane shared with me. I'm going to paraphrase this, Diane. If you need to straighten it out, you can. Because this is the import and the impact that works for me as to why this makes a difference. Now, the first big difference maker is I'm really looking forward to well done, good and faithful servant. But that's not coming, it looks like, anytime over the next 24 hours. But the second thing is this. It's when the feedback is not great job, great discussion. It's when somebody goes, I was feeling like El Crapo today. I was feeling like this whole Jesus thing felt like a wash. It just wasn't embracing me, and I was not feeling like this was mattering at all. And the discussion and the content are those that lifted me up out of the yuck and set my feet back on solid ground to make me say, okay, I'm ready to battle another day. Folks, that's why I'm in the game to do this. It's not our battle. And it's not our battle to win, but it's our battle to be equipped to stand, and then, if the Lord allows, to take ground. And so when that is the kind of feedback, see, the difference there is wonderful when I can reflect back on Pastor Bruce's sermons and recognize that not only do I know what passage he pulled from, but I understand the key components as opposed to the pithy story or the cute anecdote or antidote that he threw out there to make me kind of listen to what he was going to talk about. Because so folks, you'd be surprised that when folks listen to a sermon, they remember the stinky cat reference more so than they remember the scripture and then the applications and what you're supposed to walk away with. And so I always love that the maturity of Diane is amongst us, because sometimes she'll just say, today was yuck. It was yuck personified. And thank you that the course of conversation, the course of discourse, the information that was shared is such that it helped me to feel like I'm ready to be in the battle again. Because folks, that's what our lives are in some regard if we belong to Jesus and do this well. All right, so I'm on the soapbox. I'm standing off it. Let me give you some room there if you need to comment or to just say, you got it wrong, dude. You don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly the opposite. Because this is Gilgal. We have to prepare ourselves for the battle that's coming the rest of this week. And sometimes we do come in hurting or beat up or discouraged or that sort of, and you reminded me of something that I had forgotten, and that was I would come into music practice and I would feel the way she was describing. I don't want to sing. I don't feel like singing. I got beat up at work, whatever. And then you would make me sing. You would, and not only you would not only make me sing, but you would make me sing a song that indicated that I loved Jesus and I loved singing and singing about Jesus. And all of a sudden I'm going, okay, I need to either straighten up or be happy being a hypocrite. So we need this encouragement because we've got battles to fight this week. And all of what you just said is exactly what we need to have, building each other up. This is a slack line. I'm surprised that you held on to your 17-year-old encounter as long as you did. It was probably yesterday while you were finishing up a bad day, but I commend you for holding on to that, because that's exciting. 17-year-old Messianic Jew that wants other folks to understand who he is. And I want you guys to remember that, because when we get into the first verse of James, I want you to think about Messianic Jews for a little bit. But yeah, we need to build each other up. We need to encourage each other. This is E17, holding each other's hands up as we have the battle raging around us and in front of us.
Preston, I don't know if this is 100% in the same line, but probably the closest thing I've ever had to, and I'll just say it this way, church membership, to being part of a church fellowship. The closest thing I've ever had humanly to that was when I was in the high school band, because there was a similar camaraderie and we were working for a common goal. And the strength or weakness of what we did was really based on people's involvement, engagement. But I was thinking about how when I was in high school, because of the way that our band room was set up and stuff like that, and because of our shared love for the work that we were doing, before homeroom in the morning, we'd all show up in the band room and hang out. At lunchtime, we'd get together and we'd hang out. Most of us were dating somebody that was in the band. I mean, we were pretty much in for a penny, in for a pound. But here's the deal. looking back now, 40 plus years later, I don't remember one conversation I had in the band room before school or at lunch or any of that thing, except for the times I was traumatized by my two best buddies who did that really, really well. But we still laugh about that. What I do remember is the time that we marched at Disney World as a band. I remember the trips we took. I remember the football games we played in. I remember very distinctly some of the concerts we had and some of the songs we played. And when it was right, it was really right, and you remember that. And I think translating that to the church, I think where so many people in modern day Christianity are kind of stuck is they're there for the fellowship. They're there for the friendships. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly all right. But that's not the stuff that you're going to remember years and years later. It's the times you're going to sit back and say, remember that time that we went to the whatever, fill in the blank, or that we had this event, or that person that we've been praying for years. Preston, remember this? Remember that the guy we were praying for years finally came to Christ, and we were all there to celebrate that together. Or those eternal things are what we ultimately are going to remember. And so I say all that to say this. I think probably the word that has been, and I feel like there's a teaching opportunity here, for me at least, with my gang, is to really understand what the word fellowship means, and to recognize it in its fully orbed aspect. Because what fellowship has become in the 21st century is, we had great fellowship out on the golf course. and if you want to be real jerk store about it, you say, well, so what spiritual things did you talk about while you're out on the 18 holes? It's like Christians have come to believe that when Christians are doing something together, it's fellowship. It's like, no, fellowship really has to do with having something in common. And you could say, well, we have our salvation in common. Well, I think it goes a lot deeper than that. It's about participation. It's about being engaged for the kingdom in some way. Can we have fun doing that? We should. So I don't know. I don't know if that really is down the same path where you're at, but it's just been something that's been grinding on me lately, is that I think we so often have really stolen the power from what Christian fellowship is really all about. And if we start to understand that and imbue that into people, I think that the Gilgal idea comes into more clarity, and I believe that we would see a higher level of striving to join together and to serve the Lord together.
So that's not unlike what it is that's on my soapbox meter this week at all. When I think about the teaching that I get from Gene, especially the evolving teaching that Gene has kind of begun to embrace, when I think about the Bible study that I've experienced with you over the past year, or the weekly sermons that I'll get from you, when I think about Steve's apologetics, when I think about Diane talking about what she's doing in her Bible study, when I think about Sarah talking about not only the Bible studies that she's been through, but her relationship with her girls. When we think about kind of what it is that Pastor Bruce just shared, I almost have weekly, and I don't know that I do this as often, but I probably do it maybe once a week. I have reason to brag about you all, because there's something that's pertinent, that's relevant, that stands out about our common cause together, that helps me to go, I know a guy. I know a lady who, and I can brag on you because I can rely on what we've shared together and what is poignant about our relationship together, that says, I need a lifeline. I need to phone a friend. And so I can remember very much where Steve is when I need that kind of friend. I know what it is, how to reach Brother Gene when what he's teaching about or where his specialty is something I can rely on. And so that's happened for me with us as people together. but also in the variety of teaching that we get, that stands out for me. So I try not to attaboy Steve, because the funny thing is, a lot of times I'll attaboy Steve because there's a synchronicity of thinking sometimes from this teaching to what Steve then has worked on the last week that he's shown to Sarah to say, how about this? And that'll happen sometimes with Brother Gene. It happens more time than I want to tell you with Pastor Bruce. And I say to you folks that there's a synergy that the Lord has kind of has brought in and amongst us that I would like us to appreciate and not to just discard as something simple. And then to take from the teachings, folks, things that stay with us, not perhaps just for the day, but during the week. And it's not an attaboy that I'm looking for, because right now it sounds like I'm propping up your leadership. I'm not. What I'm saying is leaders don't do what they do just for our leaders aren't doing what they do for a stipend or for a check. We're doing it so that we can have just a closer walk with the Lord Jesus. So, all right. Stepping off the big, huge, false soapbox. Thank you. So a couple items. Let's see if we can tackle these items as we wind down this week. And because my health is certainly different this week, we're not ending early. So there you go. So when we take a look at the arena today, one of the popular concerns is climate change. Climate change, oh my gosh, that's on everybody's mouth, especially if they're politically oriented. Climate change, the data, climate change, it's like a broken record, which we don't really have anymore. Some of you are just old enough to remember what a broken record is. So how do we use the scripture to push back? And let me make the distinction. When I badmouth, and I always will, the concept of climate change, global warming, global cooling, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be good stewards of the earth. That's not what I'm talking about, because that's what we were commissioned to do way back in Genesis, is to be good stewards. So I'm not telling us that we can't be good stewards, and through not being good students, we can't influence and affect the topography and the land around us. But I think it's really excessive. It's excessive hubris. Isn't it neat to put those two together? It's excessive pride to believe in the concept of climate change. Why would I say that from a Bible standpoint? What would you use from the Bible to perhaps be in accord with the crazy statement I just made?
And you may have gone there with Genesis 8:22.
So what's 21 and 22?
21 and 22.
You want 21 through 22? Okay.
Sure.
Let's see. Well, 21. So I'm reading from ESV. And when the Lord
Yeah.
smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. And then 22, which is where I focused, was while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So seasons
what's
are
that
going to
mean?
continue as long as the earth
Yep.
is here.
Okay. So the big, huge concept here that you're driving in this conversation is what? What stands against the concept of climate change in the discussion you just presented, Sarah? And that's open for everybody.
That's open for everybody.
Say that one more time, Preston, for me,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Yeah. What stands in blatant contrast to the concept of true global or climate change?
What stands in blatant contrast
Yeah.
to climate
So,
change?
yeah. What says climate change can't be?
It's God's sovereignty.
Thank you. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
That's really what it is. If you believe he's sovereign and he said what you just read,
Yeah.
I worry.
Sorry, I couldn't get that because my next ones were about God is sovereign over everything in Psalms. Yeah. Okay.
It still comes down to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God.
Well, that's kind of, I was actually going to go to a different kind of discussion than that, and I appreciated that because I basically fast forwarded to the New Testament, to first century, where the very thing that Jesus uses to tell people they can discern the weather, red sky in the morning, sailor take warning, red sky at night, sailor's delight. The very thing that they were doing then, we still do today. I still look at the sky and say, okay, it looks like it's going to be nice in the morning, whatever. So, and that's been 2,000 years. This goes back farther than that, probably closer to like 12,000 years. And if in that period of time, it hasn't changed very much, why are we concerned that over the past 200 years, we have really messed up this country, messed up this planet? I don't get it. So that's just me.
Oh, there was one major change that took place.
Well, okay.
I had to define the word rain.
Well, it's true.
You know,
Okay, so this is perhaps an opportunity when folks start talking about climate change, we can say, yeah, Genesis 6 talks about a climate change. Things changed quite a bit, but not much since then. Like he just said. She said, you know, Genesis, who was reference?
8:22.
Okay, so that's after the flood.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah.
So
I
let's
think that's great.
let's stand and pivot a little bit on that Genesis 6 concept, because you're talking about the worldwide flood, right? So let me ask this question so you can help push back a little on why Genesis 6, it can and can't be the argument entry unless you recognize how to stand on it. What's the ultimate effect of climate change and global warming? Well, climate change. What's the ultimate effect? Why are our politicians, why are the citizens of the world right now telling us that it's important for us to be a part of climate change and its practices? Why?
It's political. It's two things. If you research this and you go into a little research on it, you find out that it's turned out as being UN driven, with the idea behind sort of a world governance establishing. You create a crisis and you create the answer to that crisis, which is always more authority in governance.
And not to mention paychecks.
Yes, that's the number two. The number two thing has become a method of wealth transfer. So you can trick, and a perfect example of that happened this week. So it's a transfer of wealth from your middle and lower classes to the rich. The rich get richer. One example of that is a lot of wealthier Western nations. Well, in this case, it's supposed to be wealthy nations pay the poor nations. We'll see if that happens. But Biden announced this week that the U.S. is going to be on board for this donation to the UN, like billions of dollars. It's going to end up being a pot of like $2 trillion. That's where Western nations are going to transfer wealth to poorer nations as a reparations for the damage caused to the climate by our industrialization. So essentially, what it is, they're going to take our taxpayer monies into the UN, who's then going to decide what they're going to do with this money, as a form of, oops, we're sorry, we've caused damage to the climate, which we know hasn't. There's no scientific evidence for that.
So the glaciers melting and the droughts. And
That's normal climate.
Okay.
NASA came out in the 80s. NASA came out in the 80s and said, all the climate change that you're seeing it's based on two things. It's based upon water vapor in the air that causes warming, just water vapor. And the other thing is the position of the sun and its rotation, in the Earth's rotation and tilt on its axis. Mm-hmm. And they said that in the 80s. You can't make a lot of money off of that. Or get the power. I mean, look what happened in Sweden this week. Sweden announced this week because they announced a ban using your electric vehicles because they do not generate enough power to charge your electric vehicles. People think, oh, electric, where the power still comes from coal plants, nuclear plants. That's where the power is generated to plug in your electric. They said you're saving the environment. You're not.
Well, that's the problem all along, right? Because we invent things, we don't look at the long-term effects of them. And then once we get there, we're like, oh, what are we going to do with this nuclear waste? What are we going to do with this coal ash and, stuff in our water? And we're very much catch-up people.
Right.
And then it's a little too late.
And well, the consequences that they don't like. There's I saw this week that there were images of all these electric scooters that some country had developed to save. And what happens is they realize that the batteries don't last that long, and so there's like this huge graveyard of all these little electric scooters. and like the things that people think about what goes in to make those batteries, you're going to find cobalt and all these different things, and lithium, and the mines create these vast, enormous holes.
Solar panels.
It's
Wind turbine blades. What do you do with those?
They still run. You still have to put oil to make the wind turbines go. All of those things are still necessary, and they don't really save anything. Save nothing. And the big focus, what you find out is carbon is a big focus. Well, the thing about it is what does carbon really do? Well, it does nothing as far as increasing temperature. Again, it's water vapor. What carbon does is it provides food for the plants. Plants grow, the plants provide oxygen for us. So reducing carbon typically is a bad idea. What you end up with is fewer. So I saw a scientist this week talking about the reduction in carbon. As the last time that the carbon was this low in our atmosphere was during the last ice age. Was when glaciers covered all of North America.
So that'll help the glacier.
Yes.
But see, that's where it all starts to fall apart. Is if you've got a biblical worldview, in my opinion, this world is not billions and trillions of years old, And to me, if the world really is billions of years old, like they all think, they should be way less worried about it than me, who think the Earth is only 6,000 years old, because the percentage of time that this has been going on would be a much higher percentage for me than for them, right? I mean, that's kind of where it starts. But to your question, what's the central core? And Steve said it's the sovereignty of God. Mankind thinks he can change things. We think we can change this earth. Now you're right. We can't just trash this earth. We've been given stewardship over this earth. And so we're to treat it with respect and care and love because God has given it to us. But this idea, Michael Crichton talks about that at the beginning of Jurassic Park. If you've ever read the book, he's got a pretty cool vibe on that. And you probably find a reading somewhere of Charlton Heston reading that, which is a really cool reading of that. But I looked at Colossians 1, and the back part of 16 and verse 17 says, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. That's all I got to know. He's holding it together. And regardless of what we do or don't do, this earth, this universe is in God's hands, in Christ Jesus' hands. And, if he takes his hand off of it, boom, it's gone. And so as long as he's in charge of this planet and we're in relation to what he's telling us to do, I'm not concerned in the least about it. Though still being a good citizen and all that sort of thing. But we keep wanting to make it sound like we somehow are going to be able to take the reins of this world.
And folks, part of the wealth of this group is having a guy who looks at the variety of angles that Steve does to help you to be in the political and financial discussion, right? But the simplicity of what Bruce just said, folks, that's what your Bible tells you. Is your Bible, number one, tells you that God's in charge. That's what we just got out of Genesis 8. And then Bruce is reminding us that all things that were made for him, through him, and by him, and that he holds this all together. And so, folks, until he takes his hands, until he decides to remove his his holy gluons. This place ain't going nowhere. And so, this is almost one of those places where I'm trying to make sure we have enough information to talk to folks who are non-believers. Thank you, doctor. But the other component is this as well, folks. You'd be surprised at the amount of folks who say that they're Christians who are struggling with climate change. There are Christians who are struggling with climate change. And folks, you got to remind them that what God's sovereignty is, it's in the Bible. It's in this passage. That God's in charge of this all, and we can muck things up, but we can't blow this whole thing up until he says it's time to do that. So if somebody would be kind enough to maybe turn to 2 Peter 3, 7 through 10.
Hang on one second, Preston. Steve wanted to say something real quick before we go there, if you can.
I was just going to say that I think the climate change issue and the stewardship issue are really two different things. Because the climate change is all about panic, and just being a good steward that's part of our design. We were initially designed to be good stewards, to take care of the garden, and it shouldn't be done out of fear of we've only got 12 years and the world is going to end because climate change. It should just be part of what you should. That's what you were created, part of your purpose. You shouldn't be out there leaving your like San Francisco and places like that where they just have needles and all kinds of stuff. That shouldn't exist. But it shouldn't be done out of a fear of somehow there's going to be a global catastrophe to do those things.
Okay, and on the
Well said, Steve.
I was going to take us to the very passage I think you're talking about, Preston, because I was about to suggest 2 Peter 3, 10 through 12. I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to have a comment afterwards. But
how about take it all the way back to 7? You can go 7 through 12.
Yes, sir. But by his word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire. He's kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. And do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, but that with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like one day. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought we to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the Lord, coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. That's global warming.
So part of Steve's discussion earlier was stewardship versus climate change. Folks, look, we're living in an age, and we say this a whole lot. Church people don't know what's in their Bibles. And even if they're reading sometimes their Bibles, they don't know what it means. And we use words that Christians use all the time, and they don't really know what they mean. One of those is stewardship. The other one that you heard Bruce wonderfully refer to earlier was fellowship. Folks, we use these words, and we don't understand how to apply them to our belief structure and our belief system. So the Lord put us here to be good stewards. But even if we're bad stewards, we can't blow the whole place up until Jesus says he's going to blow the place up. And that's sometimes what we have to help our church-going brothers and sisters to understand, why not to be afraid of climate change. My wife and I, we have had some kind of conversations with a guy who you've met, who says that he's a believer, right? And the funny thing is, he's an engineer. So we've tried to help him to understand the concepts here that are a part of Scripture to help back him off of the reason that he thinks the liberal agenda is that which he needs to embrace because it's actively addressing climate change. But folks, here's the other thing too, and Steve kind of brought this to mind as well. We can throw whatever kind of money and situational analysis at the issue. It's not gonna fix what we think needs to be fixed. Just is not. So it's a money issue. It's a political issue kind of when it really kind of plays itself out the way that Steve is referring to. But folks, if you're going to change the minds of some of the folks that are shoulder to shoulder with us saying that Jesus is their Lord, you have to point them to the sovereignty of God. You have to point them to the fact that Jesus, who is God, is holding this whole Megillah together.
Hey, Preston, one thought, just because, everything you're saying is dead on, but I think Christians have run into a major buzzsaw in years past on some other issues. For example, when we talk about dinosaurs, for years and years, Christians, but seriously, years and years, Christians denied that dinosaurs ever existed. Right. And that kind of puts you in a tough place when you say, well, that I don't know where that came from, but that can't be true. Evolution, a related issue. Macroevolution does not exist. Microevolution is scientifically provable. And yet when we say, well, evolution is not right, we look stupid. And I think in the same way, embrace the fact, yes, the environment is changing. That things are changing. The water levels may be going up. It may be getting warmer. But does that mean that we're headed toward a disaster? No, it doesn't mean that at all. As an example of that, historians have looked back during the American Revolution. And during that period, we were, at least North America, maybe the whole world, I don't know, but was in what they called the Little Ice Age. And it's been used as an explanation for why there was so much revolution going on in the latter part of the 18th century, because it was cooler. And so it was easier to go to war. I mean, that's so simplistic, right? But you think about it. If it's cooler, you don't mind wearing your wool uniforms, going out there and getting a little bloody. And so, we want to look at less than 200 years of weather records and cast this entire narrative on that. And again, if you think the world's billions of years old, a couple hundred years shouldn't matter to you. And I know they're saying, oh, we're digging down in the cores and Antarctica and all this other kind of stuff. But there's other preconceptions there that are just a little bit sketchy as well. But I think when we're going to engage the conversation, I don't think we can start by saying, well, there's no climate change. Embrace it. Okay, fine. Let's say you're right. Out here in Hawaii, they're now using it. We've had to change our forms, our realtor forms. If you live near the ocean, you have to disclose that you're within this zone where if the water rises 3 feet, that your property is going to be affected. Now, that's a big assumption for me. I keep going down to the same beaches and it doesn't look like the water's any higher, but that's another thing for another day. I just think we need to say, okay, let's say we're right. Let's say we are having climate change instead of being deniers. I think we need to at least embrace that reality that may be happening. And then we've disarmed that part of it so we can actually have the conversation. You guys may not agree with that, but that's where I live.
Oh, no, Pastor, you're absolutely on in there. And I didn't say that with the eloquence that you did. My whole point is ultimately, especially this for believers, we can't blow the planet up. So Genesis 6 suggests that when the Lord wants a global climate change, there can be, but even that global change, and this was the point somebody was making earlier, it still didn't wipe out the life on the planet, right? So we can embrace that there can be the changes, environmental, global cooling, global warming, but it's not going to make humankind extinct, because ultimately, folks, that's where they're driving, that the ultimate consequence of climate change is the extinction of life. It's an ELE event, ELE. And we can't do that. That's a huge presumption of grand hubris on our part. And so Christian by Christian, folks, you got to pull Christians back off that ledge. And like Bruce said, for folks who are non-Christians, well, folks, understand a little bit of your history, understand a little bit of the science and say, yeah, there are going to be micro changes if we're talking about a planet that potentially is billions of years old, right? Because that's where the percentage would be. And let's address just a little something that Bruce said, that we can't fix it all now. Part of the reason that the dinosaurs got Christians in the problem was the Schofield Bible. And we've talked about this back in the 1800s, is that because the Schofield Bible was in everybody's household, is that they just didn't prepare for dinosaurs. And so Christians wound up looking like religious idiots, as opposed to having believed the concept or recognized how the two could coexist. And so since the Bible wouldn't change, Christians looked like we were rigid idiots when all the fossil evidence was showing otherwise. And it should have been easier had our scientists been working in some ways with our Billy Sundays, our Spurgeons, our Moody's, to be able to help folks understand the coexistence of both, and then that Schofield Bible may have been amended to help Christians in their families in the 1930s be able to push back on the effects of the Scopes trial. All right, so that's our last sociopolitics stuff for the day. Guys, I hope this stuff is important. I hope it matters for you, because talking with folks during the course of our week about Jesus being real, that's all that really matters. And celebrating with folks who may have the guts to be able to do that when I'm not doing it. That's why I got to put my arms around that 17-year-old kid. I'm not doing what he's doing. I'm hanging out in Sin City looking for where the sin's at. So we're putting a bow tie on this week. Your comments, your thoughts, your feedback. Thank you all for gathering, whether virtually or hanging out there in a great place comfortably together.
I will say, Press, that I'm appreciative of just being able to have these verses, or at least if I can't remember the verse, I can go back to my notes, right? So kind of like what you've always said, make the Bible the bad guy, right? And so it helps you get to that point. But a lot of times, if you get into a conversation about this, but you're like, I don't know. But now it's helping to equip us to be better people for Jesus, better equipping the world, right? So I'm very appreciative of this. So I thank you for kind of taking us down this path.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, a lot of these topics we're discussing is going to tie into the next topic. because a lot of us, we're sitting here and we're going, if you're a Christian, why would you think these things are coming? Why would you think these things are occurring? Why would you feel like climate change is an issue? Why would you feel like these transgender and these things are issues that you can't discuss or that you need to accept because, you know, people can't help the way that they're made or the way that they're, why would you think these things? And it still comes down to just with Genesis 1:1, right? And it still comes down to the indoctrination. Because they're just as indoctrinated. Christians are just as subject to that indoctrination as everyone else.
So there's also this flip of the coin where I've heard a lot lately. I listen to a Christian radio on my way to Farmville all the time, and it's got a lot of preachers on there preaching about stuff. And I can't remember the name of this one, but he's always preaching about how climate change is now leading to end times, and we've got to be alert. And I'm always thinking, Jesus told us that he didn't even know. Only God knows. And shouldn't our focus just be on today, because we don't know tomorrow's promised? But how do you push back against those guys? Same things, same verses. I mean,
Yeah. Hey, So I appreciate that that's a rhetorical question of sorts, but let me also throw out that there's a legitimate answer, and that answer is kind of in 2 Peter 3, where it talks about the Lord's that a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day, right? And that the Lord is long suffering, and He wants that none should perish. Now we don't want to get into the empiric nature of that, because if He really wanted none should perish, then none would perish. But that's not the point of that. The point of the discussion is. Our job is not to sit around and look at the calendar, because the Lord's going to come when He comes. And since He's eternal, we don't know when His eternality is going to kind of clean the slate, ready for the do-over. So our job is exactly what you just said, is to be concerned day by day for the folks that are in our environment so that they can come to a saving understanding of who Jesus is. Because 1,000 years is like a day is like 1,000 years. We can't sit around and try to guess when the Lord's coming back.
Distraction. That's all it is. You know, at the end of the day, it's distraction. It distracts us from doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I would say essentially that's to echo what he says, is the answer is kind of like maybe, but if your point is fear, I mean, your fear should be, I'm running out of time then. I need to do what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. But God told us over 365 times in the Bible not to be afraid. So.
But my point is, okay, maybe. But
I know.
my point is to start digging your bunker. You know, the point should be, okay, then I gotta tell this.
Keep busy.
Hey, you know, folks.
Hold on a second. Just something.
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Gene.
I think I lost one of the two. That's okay. I'm sorry.
I'm with you. Sorry.
Yesterday we were at a restaurant and we were enjoying a gathering, basically intended to be a final gathering, but not. And one of the participants brought out an object, and each family received this object that was made out of very heavy household aluminum foil. And we have a sample for those of you who would like to see this. And I saw this. Can you see this?
Yes.
This is a hummingbird and a flower. And I used this because it was right here on the table. I said, okay, well, isn't it amazing how you can open up a roll of Reynolds wrap and find that this is evolved? And then the point was made, no, that's been created. And then I said, well, so does that mean that you can't walk down the beach and the silicon in the sand has become a computer and evolved into a computer? And so we began to have, a bit of a discussion. And I think folks around the table were on board with me on that. So yeah, we can actually make use of things like this. This is really, I'm not sure what this has to do with Christmas, because it's kind of like a Christmas thing. But we can actually agree with, this is, years, 1,000 years, 1,000 years a day. Misquoted, I understand that. Day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years a day. This is what got William Jennings Bryan in trouble, because he had the Scofield Bible that said, well, that may give us an opportunity to say that the dome in Genesis was just an age, a period. It may be millions and thousands of years. And that wasn't the thing I was going to say. We need to understand, denial of dinosaurs, that's crazy. But at no point does a dinosaur become, a chimpanzee, or, we don't have these kinds of macroevolution kind of thing. We need to be able to, like Steve said, there's that, but we need to understand that we are in an age when the time is drawing short, and we need to be more actively involved in helping people to understand that if you have fear, perfect love casts out fear, and we know who has.
Okay, you're not wrong, and appreciate you reiterating that, brother. Diane's point is very much spot on. Whether it's a Hagee or it's you'd be surprised, folks. There's a lot of guys that are giants that are end times mavens. John MacArthur's one of those. David Jeremiah is one of those. And I think back to the time when I knew when Jesus was coming, and I did. A friend and I had outlined it all. We had documented it. So he was supposed to have been here in 1981. But he somehow didn't stick with our timetable. I don't know what Jesus was thinking. But my point being to you is when there's an emphasis on that being the training, folks, it's like this. And this is, I can tell you comfortably how my friend and I, Keith, felt about maintaining this, because we have been developing this for years. We felt like we knew something you didn't know. And there's a benefit to having, if my dopey friend Ernie you've met, he and I used to, and to my wife's hating it, we used to enjoy lateral thinking puzzles. And we would call each other up and we would give the premise of a lateral thinking puzzle while the other person knew the answer. And the most insulting thing to say to the other guy was, do you just want me to tell you the answer? Because the whole point was for the other guy to figure out what the answer was. But empirically, you held all the power because you knew what the answer was. You were in charge of the yeses or the nos. And so, folks, when we have a lot of folks from our pulpit teaching you end time stuff, they believe they have answers that they honestly they don't have those answers. And when Diane says brilliantly, when Jesus at that particular point in time in his earthly ministry said, no one knows except the Father, what he was trying to say to us in some ways is what Steve says. Don't be worrying about what you don't know. But if you're concerned about it because the days are growing short, then doggone it, get out and do what you're supposed to do and stop worrying about what the date's going to be. So that's going to be my discouragement when you got guys, and I know them because I listen to them too, and Ellen listens to me yell at the radio. I thought it was part of my genetics, but I've learned people that are not with my same color, my same tan, yell at different media devices too. But having said that, those guys are trying to let us know that there's a secret that they know that we don't. And here's the thing, they don't know no more than you know, folks. You know that Jesus is coming. The day is coming anytime. Go tell people so that they're ready for the day. That's what the message should be. Anything other than that, you need to listen to the guy and you need to yell at the guy and then write down that guy's a nincompoop. Because he's stressing, he's majoring on absolutely the minors. And that's why our church people are ill-equipped, because sometimes our leaders want to be a little bit bigger than the rest of us, instead of empowering and equipping us to go and do the same thing that they're doing.